My name is Steve Rahi. I am a Premier Field Engineer specializing in System Center technologies. Today's discussion is part 11 of an ongoing series talking about operating system deployment in ConfigMgr 2012. Today's discussion will center on the idea of Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, MDT, integration. So here's the agenda. So as we go into this, let me just say, this session will be more or less an overview of MDT and how you can leverage it standalone, how you can leverage it in ConfigMgr. We're not going into the deep corners of MDT to explain it because, frankly, that would be a series about as long as the one that we're in the middle of right now, right? Plus, the focus of this series is not MDT, it is OSD and how we can leverage the goodness that MDT does, in fact, bring to OSD. Now, let me say from the outset, and you'll probably hear me say this in various forms as we go along, there are a variety of opinions on MDT and how it can be used and in what forms it can be used and so on. And there are a lot of ways that you can do imaging, as you've just seen in OSD by itself. My position on it is that if you have OSD, it should be the center stage of imaging and MDT should be supplemental. But again, you'll hear me say that as we go forward. So in terms of the agenda, here's what I want to do. Talk a little bit about what MDT actually is, kind of pose the question, should we do MDT, should we do OSD, should we do both, right? You kind of know my answer to that already. Installing and exploring MDT, so I want to go through that in the standalone MDT just for familiarity. And then talk about integrating between MDT and OSD, a couple of tips, and then we'll be done for this session. So as we start to talk about what is MDT, in bright yellow letters here, don't fear the MDT, don't fear the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit. I say that, kind of to be funny, but to make a point, right? MDT is something that a lot of people start with before they have OSD. Even if they have OSD, they'll start with MDT. It's something that you really aren't fearful of, typically, right? But if you're an OSD-focused person, MDT might be a little bit of an unknown, something else to learn, right? It's really not that hard. The components integrating with ConfigMgr are really not that hard, and they bring a lot of value, right? In this same thought, let me just say this. I mean, MDT does add complexity. It absolutely does, especially depending on the way that you integrate it. It can add complexity. I'll refer back to that in a different form later, right? Whenever I show you an MDT-generated task sequence, I think that for the uninitiated, an initial task sequence built by the MDT wizard is a little bit daunting, right? It's not hard, it works great, and it works well, but it might be a little bit confusing to start with. But again, more on that to come. So what is MDT? Well, certainly MDT is a free product, right? It's one of those things when you see the free price tag, you might wonder, well, is it worth spending time with? And MDT absolutely is. It is a fantastic product. It is designed to allow organizations that do not have OSD to be able to image quite effectively, right? And even those that do, to be able to have some additional capabilities beyond what OSD provides out of the box. So it's a fantastic tool. It is free and does have some limitations because of that. It's not a product like ConfigMgr at all. ConfigMgr is much more than just imaging. And with that, is kind of further down in the list, or in our discussion, if you have stuff in ConfigMgr, it's going to make the OSD experience easier and better, right? But MDT can handle it completely standalone, free, very rich, very flexible standalone imaging solution, right? Again, as we've alluded to, for imaging only. Interesting point, MDT is built on the OSD task sequencing engine, right? If you were to look back in history, MDT, I can't remember the version, 2000. Well, I can't remember the version. There was a version of MDT released just before ConfigMgr 2007, and it had brought the task sequencing engine. Well, guess what? That's the same task sequencing engine that we use in OSD. They just previewed it a bit early, right? So good common set of technology. Again, I'll mention this a couple of times, but because it's a common thing, people sometimes wonder, can you share task sequences between MDT and OSD? Answer is absolutely not, right? MDT is script-driven, definitely some compiled code. Because it's script-driven, it allows folks to be able to get in and see a lot of the detail about how imaging is done. That's actually a very positive thing, I think, because at the end of the day, as we've talked about a couple of times, all that MDT and OSD do really is automate what you could do manually. Right? There's nothing that you could not do manually that you do in a task sequence. It just automates it and makes it predictable, and so on. Right? So the scripts are very useful learning tools for learning how to script, learning how to do imaging, how we do imaging in MDT, right, and so on. Right? Some parts are compiled code, and because things are in VB script, there's probably some loss of efficiency in there because it's not compiled code, but nevertheless, it works. Works great. For MDT, we have a certain set of configuration files called custom settings INI and unattended XML, which is something we use in OSD as well. It's a Windows thing. And then we also have the ability to use a configuration database, okay, which we'll see some of those in a minute. And then finally, MDT is all about giving you either a light touch or a zero touch experience. It is completely up to you. So when OSD was designed, it was designed for the completely zero touch experience where you can deploy an image totally hands off. Nobody has to be there. No technician has to be in front of the machine. It just runs. You can do that with MDT. You can also do light touch with MDT, and there's some cool things, if you're going to do light touch that you can bring to bear in MDT, and those same things can be brought to bear over in OSD as well. So it's kind of become that both products are able to do light touch and zero touch. They do them differently, right? But, that's it. All right, so in terms of MDT, OSD, whether we use one, whether we use both, all those things, let's explore that for a minute. Right, we'll do that just by looking at some capabilities. Right, this is by no means an exhaustive list, but it highlights a few things. So in terms of MDT, using it as the primary imaging source would be the way to go if you don't have ConfigMgr. If you have ConfigMgr, as alluded to under the OSD column, it should be the source for imaging because of all the goodness that it brings. But more on that in a second. So as you look at MDT, and I've talked to some of my MDT colleagues, sometimes the question is, that I've asked them is, okay, so OSD and MDT do very similar things. What is the reason that you would give to have customers use MDT instead of OSD? And there's really two main things that come out. There's three listed, but the ones in the middle, reuse the task sequence, pause the task sequence and image capture kind of go together, right? So when you can definitely capture an image by MDT, by OSD. It really doesn't matter where the image comes from as long as it's a WIM file. OSD or MDT, either one, can deploy it. Right? But how you capture the image is interesting. With OSD, you don't have to use MDT or OSD either to capture the image, but with OSD, we can certainly capture an image. With MDT, we can certainly capture an image. The difference is largely in the user account being used to do the capture. OSD uses a different user account system versus MDT, which uses the logged on user, right? Because of that, there are some challenges, if you want to call them that, in OSD for capturing certain user profile settings and so on. In MDT, there is the ability you can bring to bear to pause the task sequence. So while you're doing a capture, pause the task sequence and go do some things to capture the default user profile. Right, and then resume the task sequence to continue the capture. Well, that's cool, but I kind of struggle with that a little bit because the whole idea of using the task sequence is kind of to eliminate human error, right? And yeah, we can go through and pause the task sequence and do things very effectively and continue from there. But if you're all about trying to automate and remove human error, why would we introduce a step where we intentionally ask for humans to be involved? Right, it's doable. It depends on your scenario, but that's kind of the things I think about whenever I look at pausing the task sequence, doing something, and then resuming, right? And that goes hand in hand with image capture, right? That's when we do that. UDI. So as mentioned, you can choose to either run MDT or OSD, for that matter, zero touch or light touch. If you want to get down to it again, I think MDT was built a lot more with the user touch in mind, the light touch scenario. Certainly it handles zero touch. OSD was built more with the zero touch in mind, but now has some of the light touch capabilities. UDI is something specifically in MDT that plays in the light touch environment. So this is the scenario where we have a user at the PC that wants to inject some configuration values during imaging. Normally, the task sequence wouldn't pause. It would just continue on, take whatever you've given to it. Here, the task sequence will pause, allow the user to interact and provide detail, and then continue, right? It's a cool thing. I'll show it to you in a minute. You can do the same thing zero touch. You just might have to do something like a web page to collect the data, inject it to ConfigMgr, things like that. There's all sorts of ways you can do it. There's a blog post that I did on OSD imaging web page that kind of talks about some of those details, how you might do it as an example, right? But that's it, right? In terms of OSD, I already mentioned it. If you have OSD in the environment and you have not considered it for imaging, you should. OSD should be the source for imaging, the choice for imaging, because of the things that it brings, right? Certainly we can integrate with MDT to allow you to supplement what OSD might not have natively. Right? I would encourage you, again, you'll hear me say this a couple of times, learn OSD. Learn it. Figure out what it can do for you. A lot of times when folks immediately port over to use MDT, they don't realize what OSD really is capable of. Learn it, spend the time with it, and then use MDT to supplement around it. Right? OSD, very scalable, very flexible, just in many ways, but just by the fact that it is a system that already has your applications, already has your packages. We have maintenance windows. We have reporting. We have all these things that are in the ConfigMgr system. OSD bolts onto that, can make use of those things. Right? Scalable. Very, very scalable. Our infrastructures in ConfigMgr can support up to 400,000 clients. You can bring OSD to bear in those scenarios as well. Right? And already mentioned that we leverage the existing environment to do some things if we have it in OSD. Right? Okay. So, and where we're going, again, you already know what I'm thinking about this. There is the option to use both. And I think that's a good option, right? OSD should be the one that drives the imaging, right? Use OSD, learn it, understand its full capabilities, and then plug in MDT, integrate MDT to provide solutions that OSD does not have as easily out of the box, right? Now, a little bit more on this as I talk about it. So as you think about integrating MDT into ConfigMgr, there are ways that you can absolutely tap into the MDT environment and rely on the MDT environment, have a full MDT environment up and running, tap into that with ConfigMgr. And I honestly don't think that's generally necessary. I mean, imaging is a big game. There's a lot of things you might want to do. So depending on the scenario, you might have a reason for some of that, but that's a lot of extra complexity that, generally speaking, you don't need. And I've run through a lot of imaging scenarios, and I've not really seen one that, that's not true, I've not seen many that would justify having a full-blown MDT infrastructure alongside a full-blown OSD infrastructure, right? But just food for thought. All right, so let's move into demo. Right, we're going to spend the rest of the time just walking through a bunch of different scenarios. We're going to start talking about standalone MDT and how that works and what it looks like. Again, this is an overview. It's not a session focused on learning MDT. It's a session focused on kind of understanding what MDT is and then partnering it with OSD. Right. So here are 3 demos that I want to do: installing MDT, working through the workbench, looking at the UDI designer. So to continue, let me go ahead and bring in my lab, and we'll just look at it. So the installing part, really, probably I should not have even put it on there, because I've already installed this. Now, this installation is one that could assume OSD is nowhere to be found. Right? It operates standalone, and that's perfectly a valid way to run this thing, right? So, but I'm going to show you. So I've already installed MDT. It's very simple install, right? Very, very easy. And once I do, the component for managing MDT is this thing called the workbench. So I'm just going to launch the deployment workbench, and this should look very familiar to you from the things that we've already done, right? So MDT works in form of what we call a deployment share. You can have multiple deployment shares, and on those deployment shares, you can have various configurations. So, for example, here we can add new applications, tell it the application type, source files, application without source files, whatever it is, and put that in the catalog. Now again, one differentiator. If you have OSD, you probably already have these defined in ConfigMgr somewhere, so you're going to be defining them again here, right, if you choose to run MDT this way. Operating systems. Here's where I would import an operating system. A couple of ways. I can use full set of source files. There's capability of that in OSD as well. Custom image file a WIM, you can definitely do that in OSD. Here's something you cannot. Use the Windows Deployment Services images, those that are staged on WDS. It's an extra nice little ability in MDT that you don't have in OSD. Generally speaking, probably not that big of a deal to go get those Windows Deployment Services images and get them into Config Manager, but nevertheless, it's there, right? All right, so here we have drivers, the ability to import drivers and so on into the catalog. Again, should look very familiar. Packages here, right? Import OS packages and so on. Oops. Yeah, I wasn't, okay, I'm not sure if I had showed the wrong one a minute ago, but nevertheless, here we go. Task sequences. Now, this is the heart and soul of OSD. It's the heart and soul of MDT, right? Come back to that. Actually, I'll do it now. So I can create a new task sequence. Let me just show you this because I'm going to show you again in just a second. I'm not going to save anything. Oops. Call it 3. Fine, I'm not going to save it. So the next step is going to ask me what kind of task sequence do I want to build. And you can tell from the drop-down all of these templates that can build a task sequence to operate in various scenarios, right? And this is the cool shortcut, much like using the OSD task sequence wizard, but adds more detail into the task sequence, right? So I point these out because I'm going to show you these wizards or these templates available in OSD. Not as many, right, but some. And then you can go through, create your task sequence, no problem. You can create a custom task sequence. You can create whatever you need. And I've got one created that I can just use to show properties. Right, so I'm just going to double click on this. This should look very, very familiar. This is the task sequence wizard. This is the engine that we have, right? It just works and so on, right? All right, so task sequence is advanced configuration. So a number of things in here, selection profiles and deployment shares that you want to link together, different media. Main thing I care about right here is the database. So there are two ways that you store configuration settings in MDT. One is in this file called customsettings.ini. I'll show that to you in a second. The other is you can build profiles of what you want for various computers, roles for those computers, different things that you have in the system. All right. I can add a new computer, give it an ID. I'll just call it asset tag. I'll just call it AAAAA. Give it a UID, MAC address. I'll call this 00. I don't even know if this is the right format. It might not be. Oh, there we go. Yeah, it is. Right, and I can give details as to the the details of it, the applications that should be associated with it, right, and config manager packages and all those kinds of things. And then you can add role information, locations, make and model. This is a really cool little piece. Right? And one of the things that you can do with MDT takes a little bit of work. One of the pieces that we really didn't have in OSD, at least in 2007, was the ability to track what applications are on a given computer and make sure that when we image that, it has the same applications. Right? You can kind of get at that with MDT. Won't go into great detail. We do have that now in OSD because we have this thing called the UDI, User Device Affinity, right? And with that, we can track the things that are out there that we might need to deal with. Right? More on that to come. We haven't talked about User Device Affinity yet. We will. And so on, right? But that's there. Now, in terms of the other place that we can store configuration files, that would be customsettings.ini. I mentioned that. Let me show it to you. So this is in, I haven't gotten here yet, but I've got this stored in my toolkit package. You'll actually see references to the toolkit package and the settings package and so on in an MDT standalone task sequence here. I built these for OSD integration, but they're the same. I'll just show you. So if you go to the MDT settings, you're going to see customsettings.ini. If I open that, it's a very simple ini file, standard ini file. As you start to inject customizations into the imaging process, this file grows, right? And again, not going to go into detail about it. Don't really have anything set up where I could anyway, but this is just to introduce the idea. If you hear custom settings ini, that's what is being discussed right here. All right. Then you saw the unattend XML, which is also, it's just a Windows component. It's not a MDT or an OSD component. It's Windows. to allow certain settings to be changed, right, during imaging. All right. So a third demo that was on the list is to talk about the UDI wizard. All right, and I'll show that to you. It's here. It's the UDI designer. Okay. So this designer allows you to build a sequence of customized pages that you present to the user during imaging to collect data. Right. These configurations are stored in a file. Oops. So you'll see this. I can just get to it by clicking New, or I can just Open. Don't want to save the changes. And I will go into my toolkit package, into the scripts folder, and there is this file, UDI wizard config.xml. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and open that. And some of the default options here will be different because I made a couple of edits. Right, but basically this is a series of screens that you will see, the user will see when the task sequence runs and pauses to collect information. Things like, what image do I want to deploy? What volume do I want to deploy it to? All of these things. I've actually customized this a little bit, right? But you just click on through it as the user and put it in. And then ConfigMgr task sequence will take that information and use it in the remainder of the task sequence, right? Now, one of the options that was here was a screen for BitLocker, much like it is down here. I did not decide I wanted that, so I took it away. Right? You can remove any of these items that you want, no problem. If you don't want the user to see it, no big deal. Right? But you can come in here and customize too. So this is my welcome page. I can configure it. I added the text here to call it out. I don't think I deployed this to my distribution point, so you probably won't see it whenever I run through it in the demo, but nevertheless, you can customize it, publish it out, no problem. Right? Other things that you can do is, look at the volume page, or whatever. Look at the page, get a bearing for it, understand what change you're going to make. Maybe you want to specify something specifically. You can go ahead and do that. If you want to change the image, you can specify that in. By default, this is Windows 7, right? And roll on. So you get a sense, right? Once you're done, you can just save this out. It's ready for you. Make sure you update your distribution points for the settings package and the toolkit package if you make changes. But then you're done. So I can save this and go on. Well, I've already saved it, and I already have it out there anyway in case the changes haven't made it. Maybe they haven't, but you'll still see it. That's the UDI component, and we'll see that run again in a minute. So let me pull the lab back out of the way. That's the UDI designer. All right. So now let's turn the corner and let's talk about specifically integrating MDT and OSD together. And here are a series of demos just to walk through what you get when you integrate MDT and OSD. And the reason I did not show you yet UDI is because there's some things once you do the integration, if you're going to do UDI in ConfigMgr, you need to do to get things set up, including building a task sequence that supports it. So let's just go through the process here and walk through integration. So I've already got integration done in my lab, but nevertheless, I can show it to you. So there we go. So configure ConfigMgr integration. So I've already got it done, so my only option is to remove it. But it's really this simple. You would have install selected by default, click next, and it would be done. Right. So I've seen a couple of times there's permissions issues or whatever, but generally if you run as administrator, it should be fine. All right. So now that that has been added, what do you get as a result of integrating? Well, let's start here. First, notice that we have a create MDT task sequence step that's been added or option been added here. So I've already mentioned, and I usually mention it when I talk about this or when I see this, is that you don't have portability between MDT task sequences and OSD task sequences. Even though they're based on the same engine, they are different and they don't work together, right? At least right now. Who knows what the future holds, but at least right now they don't. So by integrating, you get this ability to create an MDT task sequence. And here are the options. So just like you saw the templates over in MDT, you have the options here. All right. And so I can create a client task sequence, whatever. What I care about is just walking through the wizard to show it to you and then making sure that we highlight the UDI option, because I'll show you that in a minute. So I'm just going to say create a client task sequence. I'm not going to save this. I'm going to call it test, because I'm not going to save it. And details, whether I'm in a work group, what my organization is. If I can type, I can't. Right, whatever. Next, any kind of custom settings. So this, these wizards are used generally to try to build any kind of solution you might need. So one of the things that we've talked about in OSD already is the idea of this build and capture task sequence. That's what this is really asking you. Are you wanting to build this machine and then capture it at the end? And here I'm just saying, no, it's never going to be used for that. This is just one for deploying images. All right, so I'll click Next. Here's a selection for my boot image. So I can go choose which boot image I want. I'll just choose my 64-bit here. All right, I can choose my general settings and all that. I'm skipping over, you notice. Now I'm going to need to have a location for the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit package, which this is already created, so I'll just select it and move on. Notice, by the way, that you do have the ability to create one if you don't have one. That's really nice, because in the default OSD wizards like this, if you don't have a component prepared, you have to go create it. Now, we've fixed that in the latest versions of OSD because we do have a default client package. We do have a default USMT package, but you still need, if you're going to integrate MDT, a toolkits package and a settings package, which this wizard, if you even walk through it and don't intend to save anything, it will create those things for you that you can then leverage again, which is nice. Right. So what OS do I want to deploy? So I'll just say Windows 8. Skip the details. And then finally, here's where we arrive at whether we want this to be a zero-touch install or if it wants to be user-driven through that wizard, also known as light touch. So I'm going to choose that. Where's our client package? So we have that already here. Hit OK. Next, my USMT package here. Good enough. Next. Any kind of settings package, so we definitely need that. That's the custom settings INI. All right, here we go. And then sysprep. So all of the modern OSs should not need sysprep, so that's fine. And we will click Next. Here's my summary, and we would create the task sequence. Well, I've already got the task sequence created, so let's go look at it. So first of all, this is the task sequence. I'll go to Edit. So the first impression, right? This is a very easy task sequence. It works beautifully, as you'll see, right? But first impression, so this task sequence that is created by the MDT wizard and the task sequence, let me get them positioned, that is created by the default task sequencing engine or the OSD wizard, right? Not commenting one way or the other which one is better or worse or whatever. I'm just showing the two side by side. This is a little bit easier to digest and start to investigate. This is, at least I have a question mark in my mind, if when a person first sees this, they are just completely overwhelmed by what this thing is even doing, right? For someone who is accustomed to task sequencing and understands what task sequencing does, this is really easy to digest. For a first impression, it looks kind of eye-popping, right? Again, does some really cool things. All the things that it does are necessary for the task sequence to work, right? But look at it, because sometimes some things in here you might not care about, like check prereqs. You might not care about that. You might not care about copying the SMS logs. Maybe you do, maybe you don't, right? So there might be, even within this, even though it's generated by the wizard, some things that you could optimize, okay? But we're not here to talk more in depth about task sequencing. I'll just close this here, just pointing that out. Now, before I talk about UDI, one of the things that we have available to us is task sequence options as a result of MDT. Some of these things, a lot of these you don't have in default OSD. Some of them you didn't have until the latest update, where we started adding some of them, right? So use toolkit package and so on, gather, whatever. Those are some of the prerequisites, run some of the scripts that we need to scrape in some environment things and so on that some of the tasks in MDT might need, right? So let's just walk through them, a few key ones. So run PowerShell script. That's really cool. This script, this section is really cool because it allows you to quickly and easily specify parameters or specify a PowerShell script that you might want to run, right? Others would be maybe execute runbook. So if you have Orchestrator and you want to execute a runbook from a task sequence, which is a really cool thing to be able to do, it's very easy, right? Validate. right? So pay attention. So the PowerShell, the validate, right? This is just going to check and allow you kind of a bar to determine if this system is really ready for imaging or for running this task sequence. Install roles and features. So this is not just a server thing. It's any OS that we have that's currently supported. You can install roles and features and do that kind of thing, right? Other things that you can do under MDT, we have, and I won't go through each one of these in detail, but you can uninstall roles and features, configure DNS, whatever. The last one that I really like is install software updates offline. So I might have said already in this series, can't honestly remember because I say it a lot. If you're going to be installing software updates during imaging, I love this way, right? The default option, so we do have a default option for install software updates. The difference is we require that the Config Manager client be up and running on a system booted into Windows in order for it to work. Here, notice we're just asking for package location. So this does require an additional package that has the software updates that you want to apply or rifle through in Config Manager. But once you do that, this phase is misplaced. This step is misplaced right now, right? It needs to be up in, actually it might not be. Anyway, this step needs to be run during Windows PE, right? Because we're injecting updates offline. The goal being that once you inject your updates, you come up fully patched from the first boot. If you do it the other way, you are not fully patched. You have to wait at least a little bit of time for the Config Manager client to pull down the updates and start to apply them, right? So I really prefer this method. All right, so let me get rid of this and open it back up. So this is the task sequence we created specifically to launch the UDI wizard. And if we go all the way down here, this is where it happens, right? So let me go through and show you UDI in action. I'm going to pull in this system, and it's going to take me a couple of seconds, so I might pause the video during it. Let me start it up, and we're going to pixie boot and go grab that task sequence for UDI and show the UDI wizard coming up. All right, F12, PE should load. All right, so we're booting into it finally. Comes. So I'll let you see all phases, but I will definitely edit it so you don't have to watch things that are just time consuming. So we're going to click next. UDI, resolving dependencies, off we go. So it'll take a second to get there. Now we're using the toolkit package, then we'll fly through some other things. Downloading it. All right, using it again, and we should flip over. Running the gather step. And here we go. And as quick as that, the UDI wizard launches. Again, I don't think I updated my DP. I didn't because I can tell this is just the default. But nevertheless, you just click through here. The user does. And once we finish at the bottom, now we have all the information collected that the task sequence will need later on, right? So that's very simply a sample of UDI. So I'll pull that back out. Right? All right. So that really concludes all of the things that I wanted to talk about here and demos that I wanted to do just as we wrap up a couple of tips. First, as we've said before, if you have OSD, learn it first. If you don't, you're going to miss some of the capabilities that are in OSD natively, right? OSD should always be the focus if you're going to have the option. If you have config manager in the environment, OSD should be the first. There's so many reasons why it should be, right? Obviously, if you choose not to do it that way, that's your choice. But there are a lot of advantages of leveraging OSD first and MDT to augment, right? When you choose to learn MDT, you'll get imaging done well, but you, again, will maybe stagnate a bit on your OSD learning. Also, remember, MDT is easy. It's a great product. Love MDT. But it does add complexity to the task sequence, right? You're adding a dependency that you might want to avoid if you don't need it. So be judicious about what you do, right? In terms of MDT and OSD, I already said it, say it again, you don't have portability of task sequences between the two, right? Same engine, different products. And then last thing I'd say as a tip, I love MDT integration. Do it. You're going to have more options for you that you will need while you image and more flexibility. So with that, we will wrap up this session, and we will see you next time in session 12.